Good morning. Thank you all for coming to our second GPS or Forum GPS lunch. This is your thing. So we got great feedback last time. Please fill out your forms about everything from how the website works to your meal to the speakers. Everybody wants border. So we're looking at a number of speakers about the border. It'll probably be more than one lunch about that because there's so many aspects to it. Let's see. Today my sweet husband is going to be moderating. He's been trying to get out of oil and gas exploration since before I met him. And it's funny, every time something goes kind of awry, somebody leaves something behind that he finds and he can't help himself. So here he is again. And Jason Isaac, who is so wonderful. He is with, I almost said Fueling Freedom. Fueling Freedom was a book written by a colleague of ours who then spawned this whole movement called Life Powered. And what do you hear about energy out there in the world on CNN? Anybody? It's terrible. It's the world's going to end because we're using fossil fuels. Has everybody heard about the child molester in California? Child molester in California? So David and I used to have a beach house in San Diego, and he would take the dogs out and walk and meet people, and he met Rick. And Rick was a Top Gun pilot psychologist, Top Gun program psychologist. And after several days of meeting and chatting about the weather and the dogs, Rick says, well, David, what do you do? And David said, I'm a child molester. And Rick's a psychologist said, no, you're not. He said, well, I'm in oil and gas exploration. And Rick looked out on the ocean and said, stick with child molester. With that, you've got your
I'm wired up, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're mic'd up. All right, great.
There they go.
All right.
So for those,
Wait.
for those I haven't met, I'm David Grimes, and the rules of the road are we get out of here on time at 1 o'clock and get you guys back to work and whatever else you have to do, and try to get as many questions answered as we can and try to stay on topic. So I yield very little value to the process other than try to keep that on track. So Jason,
Great.
your show.
All right, thanks. I'm Jason Isaac. I'm the senior manager at Life Powered project of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Our short mission statement is to raise America's energy IQ, and Wayne's going to cue up, I think, video number 5 for us. This is a video that we had developed last year to try to make the connection. Our polling showed that we need to reach millennials and we need to reach women in our messaging to tell them the good story about what energy does for us in our daily lives. So the Texas Public Policy Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit. We can't get involved in campaigns. We can't tell people how to vote yes or vote no or who to vote for, but we can educate voters. And that was a video that we promoted in Colorado heavily last year for the ballot initiative to essentially ban fracking in the state of Colorado. When I was in the Texas legislature, anytime a state would ban fracking, I loved it because it meant that it was going to be better for Texas. But when you look at the world, it's not good for the world. It's not good for the people that live in those particular areas that are limited on the access to energy. That particular video moved our target audience 35 points. We did polling before and after, so people that saw that video that were opposed to oil and gas exploration and production moved 37 points to being in favor of oil and gas exploration. I think the biggest mover in there was the stretch pants. I'm a huge fan of Lululemon. I joked in D.C. a few months ago. I said, you think the Women's March is big, just wait till we ban fossil fuels and they don't have yoga pants. You're going to have a yoga pant protest like you've never seen before. I said that as I was wearing my Lululemon stretch pants, which are amazing, men. If you've ever had them, they're incredible. Get the ABC pants. It'll change your life.
All right, Jason. So this target, the video.
Is that a good steamy?
They
are incredible.
I'm probably not going to buy their pants today. Christmas
yes.
ideas abound. So
when do you get David some Lululemon ABC pants for Christmas?
So
there you go.
So these videos, clearly that was produced just for one initiative in Colorado.
And we've continued to basically promote that video around the country because of the success we saw in Colorado.
So give us some examples of where else you're pushing the video and what you're seeing from it.
So we did with PragerU, who I'd never heard of Dennis Prager until I started with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's funny because people say, oh, you've got to have young millennials speaking to young millennials. And I'm like, then how in the world is Dennis Prager and Bernie Sanders so successful with millennials? And it's the energy and it's the enthusiasm and it's the message that they're bringing to those audiences. And so we thought, well, we'll promote this video on PragerU. Within 72 hours, we had over 700,000 views of that video. And so we're trying to build a coalition around the country to help educate people because it is so one-sided, as what Wendy alluded to about CNN. It is so one-sided, the information that people see. And we were talking before about how I go speak to kids, and 100% of, and I spoke to 200 kids in Fort Worth ISD a couple of months ago, 100% of them believe our environment is worse today than it was 10 years ago. And so we promote that video all over the country. Ironically, the ballot initiative failed in Colorado, so they didn't ban fracking. The voters supported oil and gas exploration. Then the legislature went ahead and did it anyways. And out of that has spun a group that was created by a lady named Amy Oliver Cook, who's at the Independence Institute, a think tank there in Denver, has kind of spun out this group, and it's called, and you'll forgive me for the acronym, I'm not going to say it, but it's Mothers in Love with Fracking. I'll let you figure it out, but this is a lady that has led this initiative in Colorado to really educate people about the benefits that they're seeing. And now I think it's Weld County in northern Colorado is the largest oil and gas exploration county in the country because they have said, okay, if you're going to give us local control, then come on, bring it. We'll take the jobs, we'll take the people, we'll take the economic development.
Okay, so this shows the benefits that people maybe didn't know, or
Correct.
Everyday life of what they get out of fossil fuels.
Yes.
But the big part of the push against fossil fuels is the damage to the environment and the cost, right? I mean,
Correct.
So there are two sides of it. So,
yes.
So what is, if people that are just so opposed to fossil fuels and they don't want to recognize the positive, which is kind of impossible given the video, but how do you combat the other side of that as well?
So
on environmental impact?
One way that we've done it, and I'll let Wayne cue up video number 2, is this is a video I show to the kids here.
You may be surprised to learn that America has some of the cleanest air in the world, with levels of harmful pollutants falling an average of 73% since 1980. Contrary to the popular narrative that our modern economy is leading us to environmental disaster, we are proving that abundant energy, prosperity, and lasting environmental quality go hand in hand. Virtually all of America meets national air quality standards for every pollutant, meaning that our air is safer to breathe than it's been in 100 years. The World Health Organization reports that our air has some of the lowest levels of harmful airborne particulate matter in the world, 10 to 20 times lower than China and India, and better than most developed countries. We should celebrate what we have accomplished and use our energy resources to create a cleaner and more prosperous future.
And that's the message I try to teach the kids when I'm talking to them, or really any audience. We should be proud of our accomplishments here in the United States. Our population's grown, our vehicle miles traveled has increased. That means we have more freedom. Our GDP has increased. That means we're earning more. Our country's doing better economically. We're producing more energy, and we're reducing harmful pollution at the same time. In that video, we produced that earlier this year, and then the new numbers come out, of course, and people are saying, oh, well, in this current administration, the air quality is getting worse. Actually, they have continued to improve, and it's really American innovation. And I've always said we need to export our clean air around the world in the form of our energy, and we're seeing that happen more and more. It's interesting to note that I had Channel 4 News from the UK wanted to interview me on a critical infrastructure legislation that had passed in Texas, basically denying, making it a crime for people to trespass on other people's property to propose or kind of oppose pipeline projects. And he came over here and he was kind of bashing us for the environmental impacts. And I said, you realize you're from the UK, and you know your largest source of renewable energy is in the UK? And the guy that interviewed me had no idea. And I said, it's wood. And he looked at me like, what? I said, the #1 renewable in the EU and in the UK that they use for renewable energy is wood, biomass, pressed wood pellets purchased from the southeastern United States that are then shipped over across seas. But in their air quality agreements that they have, wood is considered renewable. And he was just shocked. And I said, and oh, by the way, that's 300% more carbon released. If you're concerned about carbon, 300% more than natural gas, 150% more than burning coal. And I said, that's if you're concerned about carbon, as I sit here and ingest a little. And I don't think I'm going to die from this. Hang on. Oh, yes, that's good. Yes, that's CO2. It's carbonated with CO2.
And the millennials are drinking it like literally like water.
That and White Claws.
So all the negative messaging is out there.
Yes.
It's hard to get in front of that, right? Because it's being pushed in waves. What are the more egregious mistruths that you're seeing out there today? And you talk to kids all the time about this. So what is it that they believe that really is demonstrably false in the narrative that we might find amusing?
They think that they completely want to ban the use of fossil fuels, period. And it's interesting, there are presidential candidates that are running right now that say we've got to ban the use of fossil fuels and then go 100% renewable, which is interesting. Mark P. Mills of the Manhattan Institute has written some great information in the Wall Street Journal, and it said if you want to go 100% renewable, be prepared to dig a lot, because you need a lot of coal to make the steel, you need a lot of oil to make the plastics that go in these products. Oh, and by the way, you need a lot of rare earth elements to go in the manufacturing of wind, which are not mined here in the United States, in part because of our environmental protection laws that we have in place. They're mined in China. I had this conversation with the Department of Energy, said, okay, great, Department of Energy, my understanding was created so that we could become energy independent here in the United States. It was kind of a culmination of a few different agencies into the Department of Energy. And I said, you're out there promoting technology that is heavily dependent on rare earth elements, which are mined. 80 to 95% of the world's supply comes from China. And I said, what are we doing to promote mining rare earth elements here in the United States so that we can be energy independent? And I said, and what about the storage of the radioactive waste that comes off of those? I've worked with a geologist, Dr. Ken Morgan, who started the Energy Institute at Texas Christian University. And he says that for every ton of rare earth elements that you mine, you create 1 ton of radioactive waste, 3,800 tons of toxic waste. The toxic waste is easier to deal with. The radioactive waste is not. And that's in part why they're mined in China and places in Africa, but 80 to 95% from China. And so when I tell my audiences this, they're just shocked. They have no idea. I mean, I had someone that wanted to debate me one time, and I said, well, I'm really not prepared. But he wanted to get rid of all fossil fuels. What are you going to replace it with? And he says, oh, we'll do batteries and wind and solar. And I started to explain to him about the toxic waste, and he got angry and walked away.
What about the other impact? Animals, of course, the most heart-jerking or heartbreaking examples they have. So what are we seeing
white
in
animals
wildlife
with
and
eyeballs.
trees and all these other statistics that are constantly pushed our way?
Yeah, that's interesting. When you look at the actual geographic footprint of oil and gas production compared to wind and solar, and we're the largest wind-producing state here in the country in Texas. But when you look at the geographic footprint that's required to take up the same amount of land, I think for solar it's like 27 times the amount of acreage. For wind, it's 100 times the acreage as one oil and gas production well. So when you actually look at the footprint on land, it's much, much larger and has much more of an impact. Wind gets credit for basically killing endangered species. I had a kid ask me one time, well, what about the danger to the animals? And I said, I'm so glad you asked that question. Did you know that for every windmill you can kill one endangered bird? And that's not the question, the way the kid was going with the question. And he just looked at me shocked. And I said, yeah, that's unbelievable. I said, the oil and gas industry doesn't enjoy those same protections. And then I asked him about polar bears. Polar bears is my favorite. I show two numbers on a screen, 9,000 and 25,000. And I said, how many polar bears do you think we have today? And out of 70 kids in Austin, one kid said 25,000. Every other kid said 9,000. Again, the 200, these are really pessimistic kids in Fort Worth. 100% of these 200 kids said, 9,000. And I said, actually, in 1970, we had 9,000 polar bears on Earth, and today we only have 25,000. And some of the kids are like, why'd you say only? And I said, well, that's because the messaging that's used today. They say we only have 25,000 polar bears. Granted, it's grown significantly. That number is even wrong. It's actually over 40,000 polar bears today. So if they're the measurement of environmental success, we are doing phenomenally well living in the best environment, which is actually, I believe, true, living in the best environment of humankind today.
All right, so scientifically, the curriculum we have in schools, and you have kids.
Yes, yeah.
And you've seen what they come home with and what they're learning. So what's wrong with the curriculum they have now? Specifically, what have you seen that comes home versus what should be there? And how are we going to get that back on track, at least to where it's just truthful? Like you said, look, wind has drawbacks. Oil and gas has drawbacks. I mean, we all have costs associated with a benefit, but is it being fair and is it a level playing field, and what are they being taught?
No, it's absolutely not. It was 6 years ago. My 17-year-old son, who's now a junior in high school, I believe he was in 5th grade 6 years ago, and he comes home, and I'm in the legislature at the time, and we're actually in session, and he comes home with a test prep packet for his STAR test, his State of Texas Standardized Test Assessment. And he's like, Dad, will you go through these 100 questions? I need to get prepared for my science STAR test. So I get to about question 20. Which of the following fossil fuels causes global warming? Oil, gas, coal, or D, all of the above? And I'm just furious. And I'm sitting there, and I serve on the environment. I'm a passionate conservative for protecting our environment. No one in the legislature has ever fought harder battles than I have to protect our groundwater in the district that I serve. But I start reading through this, and I'm furious. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be some more questions on energy. 100 questions, it's the only one on energy. And I tell my son, I said, Aiden, I want you to read this question a little bit differently than it's written. But I want you to answer D if you see it on the test. I said, I want you to read which of the following fossil fuels contributes to over 80% of the school districts in the state of Texas because they have assets that are based in or run through their districts, because that's D. All of the above. Which of the following fossil fuels has led to us becoming a world leader in clean air? That's D, all of the above. Which of the following fossil fuels? He's like, Dad, I get it, go on. I mean, I had so many examples just from my experience serving on the environmental regulation and then the energy resources committees to know of how our actual air quality was. I was the only member of the state legislature, 182 members if you include the lieutenant governor, when there was an oil spill in Galveston in 2012. I was the only one, and I served a district we're landlocked, we're central Texas, outside of Austin. The only one that went to the coast of Galveston to look at the operations to clean up an oil spill. It's bunker fuel. It's used motor oil that's used to power boats when they get outside into international waters that burns a lot dirtier. And I'm thinking, how can we stop using bunker fuel? How can we find ways to recycle that so that we can put it back in our cars and it's clean? But the education effort just infuriated me, and from that point, I said we've got to change. Our kids should be learning unbiased information about energy, all forms of energy produced in the state of Texas. And we actually now, the Life Powered, you won't see Life Powered on any of the branding, but that's why I was in Fort Worth. We've got Fort Worth Independent School District, 200 students that are learning about energy in the state of Texas, and they're learning unbiased energy education from the curriculum that we've written that not only meets the state standards, because that's the big thing. If you want to get curriculum in schools, it's not just about showing up and dropping off great curriculum. You actually have to meet the state standards. So our curriculum meets the state standards, so the kids are learning things for geology, rock density, and porosity that they're going to get tested on. And then we've written the standards for high school. And so we're in the process of beginning curriculum, the development of curriculum for high school students so that they'll actually have an energy cluster. There are 16 clusters in the state of Texas right now: healthcare, agriculture. There's a bunch of them related to different career fields. And we are developing and leading the development efforts at the Texas Public Policy Foundation to develop this unbiased energy education curriculum through the Texas Education Agency for public schools, so that in 5 years, kids will graduate high school with an energy cluster on their diploma and be workforce ready to go into a workforce path. They'll either graduate with certifications or occupational licenses if they have to have them, or they'll be steered into going into engineering to work in the petrochemical or other oil and gas industries.
Okay, so that part of the curriculum is additive of curriculum?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
then
this is more for trade path or all students?
It's all students.
Okay. All right.
That have a desire to get into some sort of energy.
Okay. And so what's the path on that? I mean, you kind of beta tested this in several cases.
Yeah.
Now you've got actual implementations.
Yeah,
What's the timeline you're trying to establish?
So really the timeline is the next 3 years, the next critical years of this effort, because the TEA will this year adopt this energy cluster creation, which will create a 17th cluster. Because right now, if you're a high school student and you want to learn about energy, you have to go into the agriculture sciences cluster, which is crazy. You have to learn about animal husbandry to also learn about energy production, which, wait, why would you want to do that? And so we are, the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, I'm trying not to speak in acronyms too much, will adopt this cluster. Then they will go out and say, all right, we need a textbook. And that's where it becomes political right away, because the State Board of Education will say, okay, bring me your textbooks. And you'll have companies like Pearson, based in the United Kingdom, that will probably bring them a textbook that is full of, let's go 100% renewable wind and solar, because we just should, for the sake of humanity, when really the sake of humanity is delivering affordable, reliable energy to everyone, to pull everyone out of poverty. And that'll take about 3 years till they get a textbook designed, the courses created, and in about 5 to 6 years, you'll have those kids graduating with an energy cluster degree.
Okay. And what chance, I mean, of course, neighboring states have other oil producers, Oklahoma, Louisiana,
Yep.
and New Mexico, they're good places to be to help roll it out. But I mean, is that just a Texas initiative, or is it something you're hoping to roll out?
So it's interesting when you look at other states and where they buy their textbooks from, or what state standards they meet. A majority of states in the United States buy textbooks that meets the state standards of the state of Texas. We're the largest textbook market, and if it's U.S. history, if it meets state standards, other states will just buy them. They'll just adopt it. It's pretty amazing, but when we're as big a market as we are, that happens. And so we know that we get a good, unbiased energy education book, and that's really where the Texas Public Policy Foundation and other people in the public will need to be involved to watch elected officials at the State Board of Education ensure that we have a textbook that's unbiased, that challenges kids' critical thinking, not steering them down one direction or another.
Right, right.
This is a video that we did along with our education project.
We use electricity for almost everything. We use it to wash our clothes, keep our homes comfortable, enjoy entertainment, and protect our food and medicines. Every day, we're adding new power-consuming devices that we're increasingly dependent upon. One of the fastest growing demands on energy is the cloud. A huge collection of wireless transmitters, data centers, and factories where devices are built, each with huge power demands. With all of our devices constantly accessing the cloud, along with new technologies like cyber and cryptocurrencies, we must continue to generate a massive flow of electricity just to keep our modern lives functioning. The electric grid. It's the vast interconnected system that powers our modern lives. Electricity generated at a power plant travels through transmission lines, often spanning hundreds of miles. Once arriving at a local distribution system, it's routed through smaller lines that run directly into our homes and businesses. Each part of the electric grid is synchronized, functioning like a giant electrical machine where all parts are constantly communicating and working together. The supply of electricity can be turned up or down to meet the variable demands of our communities. But how do our power plants generate this electricity? Most of our electricity comes from large turbines that spin generators to create current. These turbines are powered by steam, created by heating water with natural gas, coal, and nuclear fission. We also spin turbines with water at hydroelectric dams, as well as quick-start jet engines and large engines like those used in marine vessels. Renewable energy, a growing part of our energy mix, comes primarily from wind farms and solar panels. These sources are not part of the synchronized grid, but instead contribute electricity intermittently. If there's no sun, like on rainy days or at night, or no wind blowing, other sources on the grid are required to ensure a constant flow of electricity. Battery technology is advancing to fill some of the gap, but physical constraints and economics make it impossible to displace the need for natural gas, coal, and nuclear power on our ever more interconnected lives. Where do we get the fuel we burn that powers our electric grid? Millions of years ago, plants absorbed the sun's energy. When they died, they were eventually buried under the surface. Under the Earth's immense heat and pressure over millions of years, the stored solar energy intensified, resulting in a set of energy-dense fuels like natural gas and coal. We use a wide range of technologies to locate, access, and bring these fuels to the surface. These fuels are then transported through pipelines, railways, and rivers, where they are processed and used in our power plants.
So a couple of things in that video. We've been educated, I guess, if you will, indoctrinated that coal is terrible. Coal is really bad. It was one of the things that I've been talking with the current administration and members of Congress is that of all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it'd be nice if they'd utilize our pollution control technology. They don't. And you look at California, and Mayor Garcetti from Los Angeles, California, is the mayor who's the chairman of the Mayor's Climate Initiative, which is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, to get cities to adopt the Paris Climate Accord and then force that on their citizens, something that Georgetown, Texas has done. And you look at the electric rates in Georgetown, Texas, they've skyrocketed. They're 62% higher than they are in San Marcos, Texas, which is 60 miles south, both college towns on I-35. But they've got this virtue signaling of going 100% renewable. They're doing it in San Antonio. The vice chairman of the Mayor's Climate Initiative is Sylvester Turner, who I serve with in the legislature, and I'm trying to get served on a policy orientation panel in January to talk about this effort. But we've been so you look at Los Angeles, we did some research and we found that 25% of the pollution in Los Angeles County actually comes from Asia. So we wind up exporting our jobs, because if you're in a non-attainment area, like in Southern California is the largest non-attainment area in the country, according to EPA air quality standards, it's nearly impossible to create manufacturing or refining jobs. You just can't do it because of the standards. You've got to go somewhere else. And so what do? They go to Asia. And then we turn around and then we import their pollution. All of California, 65% of the air quality pollution is from Asia. It's just incredible to think that, wait a second, if we produce these goods in the United States, they'd be cleaner, they'd be produced cleaner, we create more jobs, and then in turn we wouldn't import the pollution. So, and that's an issue that we've been talking about with the current administration about the Paris Climate Accord. I don't believe we should be a part of it. We're not. We're officially withdrawing from it. But what we should do is we should have other countries that meet our air quality standards. And that sounds like a good global initiative. You'd improve global health significantly. So why don't we create a Pittsburgh Accord? Because the president said he represents people of Pittsburgh, not those of Paris, when he signaled his intention to withdraw. And I said, we need to have a Pittsburgh Accord to get other countries, our trading partners, give them 10, 20 years to meet our air quality standards. You'll improve health around the world significantly. And it would improve the entire global environment.
Well, that's the other part. How do you educate politicians and people that make policy and make regulation? Right? Mm-hmm. It's prohibitive.
Yes.
In my industry, in oil and gas, it's prohibitive. In the chemical production industry. So, and you're sitting there in Austin. How do you get in front of the legislators, because they respond to their constituents?
Sure.
If the constituents all think the world's coming to an end because of our energy industry, they've got to respond to that and they've got to vote accordingly. So how do you get that? in two places, the constituents as well as the people that vote and make a regulation.
Yeah, and that's really why we exist, to raise America's energy IQ and to build these coalitions around the country. You do it through, interestingly enough, you find people that agree with you, and then you educate them so that they can debate other people, so they can share their information. You do it through social networking. We've got people that support our efforts that want us to be on TV during Super Bowl commercials, and they want, that first video we showed, that's a great Super Bowl commercial. And I said, you can reach so many more people on Facebook and Instagram with material like that, and then they will take that information, the power of social networking, and share it. So, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, trying to reach people to build grassroots coalitions. But then we do a series of seminars every month in Washington, D.C., where we get in front of the policymakers, and we get in front of their staff and help educate them. We did 4 this past summer, 1 every month, starting in May. And by the end, we were having about 125, 150 people attend, I think primarily because we were giving away Chick-fil-A for lunch. And people will line up in the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, for Chick-fil-A. And then we'd have really good, compelling, interesting speakers. And our split was about 40% of our attendees were coming from Democrat offices and about 60% were coming from Republican offices. And the staff would actually engage in conversations following the meeting with our speakers, some of who had served in the Obama administration, some who have served in the Trump administration. We have speakers at an event in D.C. that'll be live streamed called At the Crossroads, a policy summit on energy and environment. We'll have communications experts from the Reagan administration. So we have compelling speakers that teach people what to look for and really the proper communication techniques to use. But you've got to do it grassroots, and you've got to go to them, and you've got to be with the policymakers and their staff as well. We've got an op-ed that was published in on Fox News' website. I think it was in May. Katie Tawawa, it's spelled like Chihuahua, but it's Tawawa, is our communications manager at the Life Powered Project. And she wrote this op-ed and did some incredible research about empowering women. And I constantly refer back to this because this is, I think, some of our biggest talking points. And we know that this message moves people more than any other to getting access to energy. And she talks about women around the world spend over 200 million hours a day walking to collect water. I was sharing this with Hannah from Congressman Crenshaw's office a few weeks ago in D.C., and she says, oh, I've done mission work in Ethiopia. And she says, you know what technology they do have access to in Ethiopia? And I'm thinking, I have no idea. She says, implantable birth control. And I'm like, what? She goes, the women know that at some point in time they're going to be sexually assaulted on their journey to collect water. And so they're given implantable birth control. How heartbreaking is that? And then you have groups like the International Monetary Fund and World Trade Organization that will refuse to loan these countries or make funds available if they're investing in projects that are fossil-based. So they're denying them access to affordable, reliable electricity, essentially keeping them in poverty. And we've done so much great work over the last 10 years. We, humanity, the people in severe poverty has decreased by more than 50% over the last 10 years because more and more people are getting access to affordable, reliable electricity. And that is the key to really empowering women around the world. On average, women over 3 miles a day walking to collect water. UNICEF has one of the most empowering videos I've seen, really the most tear-jerking, heartbreaking videos. It's this girl named Aisha, A-Y-S-H-A. If you get a chance, watch this video. It's about a 5-minute video where a camera crew follows a 13-year-old Ethiopian girl, Aisha, walking to collect water with her camel. At the end of the movie script, the first thing that comes to my mind is they show Aisha with her brother, and her brother's doing homework. And I thought, why can't Aisha be doing homework? If we could get Ethiopians access to affordable, reliable electricity, and the best way to do that is through dense fossil fuels, then we could pull people like Aisha out of poverty and get her access to clean water.
And likely education.
And yeah, very likely, yeah, that's because the women will get educations, they'll start businesses, they'll run for office. Chuck DeVore on our team is a former California assemblyman, served in Southern California and patrioted, he left. He came to Texas and now works at Texas Public Policy Foundation. Has been there for 10 years, and he's written on this subject in particular. And PG&E, it's interesting, they're doing these rolling blackouts to stop forest fires because they've been investing in what I snarkily refer to as green bling over the last 10 to 12 years because that's what the state has mandated that they invest in. And so they haven't been investing in improving their infrastructure. And Chuck talks about this when he was in the legislature. They had a $4.8 billion plan to go out there and improve the infrastructure, to actually cut the trees down around the power lines to prevent forest fires. That's just the way their climate is. Every 6 months of every year, it gets incredibly dry and incredibly windy. And so that's part of the cause with the rolling blackouts. And to me, it's just atrocious. The funny thing is that people can't charge their electric cars and they can't vacate, which is kind of ironic. Chuck wrote on this earlier this year, and it's interesting because Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, came out and reversed forestry policy because they have basically said their forests are off hands. You cannot touch the forest. So the forestry business has dwindled significantly. Yeah, and they did. And so what happens is, guess what happens to trees? They grow, they die, they get dead, and you create basically fuel on the ground, where in forestry business, they clean all that up. And so the state lands have been off hands for forestry business, and now they're bringing that back to help clean up the forest. It's not dispatchable either, meaning with a natural gas plant, you can create more electricity on demand. It's dispatchable. Same thing with coal. You can create more on demand. With wind and solar, it's not dispatchable because the energy storage isn't there. If you took, and we've got a PhD, Dr. Brent Bennett on our team, who's a battery scientist. This is a guy that was working in battery startups, building batteries, and came over to our team a little over a year ago and does a phenomenal job. But when we need to get wonky, we get Brent in the room, or he goes and speaks to conferences with real technical people. But you take the entire battery capacity that's installed in the world today, you keep the lights on in New York City for less than an hour. That's what's installed around the world today. And it doesn't grow like computer technology does at Moore's Law. It doesn't double every year. Just the technology is not there. And so that's why we don't have dispatchable wind and solar. If we did, we'd probably be all wind and solar if we could actually store it. But unfortunately, it's just not there. That's why I continued 30 years ago, over 80% of our electricity was generated from fossil fuels. Here we are today, over 80% of our electricity is generated from fossil fuels. So it's interesting, the Arctic ice caps are receding, they are melting, while the Antarctic ice is growing. So when you hear about the Arctic ice melting, you never hear about how, on the other side of the Earth, their ice is actually growing. It's really interesting when you start to get into looking at the science, people will tell you one side of the story. They're trying to do that to motivate with fear and scare you. The sea level's rising. We don't see anything, and we're looking at research, but even if they did, what's projected is about 2 feet. So if they did rise 2 feet, or if our global temperatures increased 2 degrees, those are mild and manageable. If we get to 10 feet of sea level rise, which the projections using the United Nations, they use these models that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, uses, we'll never get to what they document to be 2 degrees or 2 feet of sea level rise. But even if we did, it would be mild and manageable, as we've seen over the last 130 years. It's interesting, I read some research that was published about a month ago in Australia talking about the barrier reef, because that's what we see. We see the bleached reef all the time. Actually, the reef is growing, and it's healthier than it's ever been. You don't hear about that. And they did some research on it. There are parts that are probably dying, but there are other parts where it's doing really well. It's the same way with groups that I speak with, and I ask them about climate change. Is the climate changing? And everybody generally agrees, yes, the climate is changing. And I said, well, how is it changing? And the kids will say, and everybody will say, well, it's getting hotter. And I said, okay, all right. So do you know where the data comes from that shows that it's getting hotter? And people were like, no. And I said, well, no is right. It's NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, publishes the data of temperature, and they've been doing this for decades. And I said, do you realize that over 90% of the devices that they use to measure temperature don't meet their own standards? I had some kids just look at me with bewilderment, like, what does that mean? Well, it means they're within 100 feet of a heat island or a heat generation source. They're like, what? I said, yeah, so they go in and they manipulate their own data to say, well, that probably had a 1 or 2 degree difference, so we'll chip the data down 1 or 2 degrees, but that's still showing an increase. And some of the data, they will just flat outright change. And it's interesting, so when you like over 90% are inaccurate because they're within a heat generating source, whether it's an AstroTurf field or a Vinahood from a restaurant, they're within 100 feet of that source. And I say, absolutely, it is getting warmer in more dense areas because we've got more asphalt, we've got more concrete. You wouldn't have those if it weren't for man. So is man contributing to climate change and the changing climate? Yes, absolutely, we are. When you look at the city of Austin, before Lake Travis was there the humidity was not what it is today. We've created more humidity. There's a place in northwestern New Mexico where there's a power plant, coal-fired power plant. They build a lake to cool the plant down. They've created humidity around that particular area where there wasn't humidity before. That's having an impact and actually changing that climate around that area. And water vapor is 95% of our greenhouse gases, so it's kind of funny when people file resolutions to eliminate all greenhouse gases. Yes, the Green New Deal calls for eliminating all greenhouse gases, which would eliminate all life on Earth as we know it. It's interesting, but so you've got to talk to them about that. And then NOAA also in 2005 put out 114 new measuring devices around the United States in sparsely populated areas away from humans. And what those devices have shown since 2005 is no increase in average temperatures. So then I asked the kids, I'm like, is it getting hotter? Some of them say yes, some of them say no, and some are like, well, I don't know who to believe now. So that's for you to decide. Look at the data, look for more data. When you hear something that you think is preposterous, when you think someone's crying wolf, go out there and look at the data. Or when you think of some 16-year-old high school dropout from Sweden is telling you to get rid of fossil fuels, look at the clothing that she's wearing. Look at the rubber bands that are holding her braids. Where did those come from? Because they came from fossil fuels. The carbon fiber boat that she's sailing across the ocean to get back to, which I think is hilarious. That the COP25 was going to be in Chile this December, and that's why she came to the United States to go speak at the UN, and then was traveling via bicycle or horseback down to Chile, which would take a really long time. And then you have unrest in Chile over increased cost of energy and transportation, and now they move it to Madrid, and she's panicking. Just got a sailboat ride today on a nice carbon fiber catamaran to sail across the Atlantic to make it back to Madrid so she can speak at COP25. Sorry, I digressed.
I'm doing a poor job of moderating.
No. I'm sorry, David.
So what about the severity of storms and the number of storms then?
Yeah, hey, Wayne, will you cue up the number 3 on here? So this is one thing when I ask the kids say the climate is getting worse, more people are dying because of deaths, and the storms are getting more severe. I don't have a screenshot to show that the actual severity of storms has not increased over the last 60 to 70 years, and there's really been no trend line with increased severity of storms. We think about Hurricane Harvey hitting here, 67 people died from Hurricane Harvey. Some of those were because they were evacuating and were in automobile accidents. Regardless, you had 67 people. When you look at what's called Isaac's storm that hit Galveston in 1900, you had 6,000 people that were killed when the storm hit, another 6,000 in the weeks later. So over 12,000 deaths following that storm. So is the severity increasing? I say when you see and this shows a 97% reduction in deaths related from climate and non-climate catastrophes. That actual number is at 98.9 decrease in deaths over the last 100 years related to weather events, if you will. I think that's incredible. The kids, I had some kids heckling me a little bit. Oh, it's because we have satellites and we can see these hurricanes coming, and they couldn't 100 years ago. And I'm like, how do you think the satellites got there? What do you think they're made of? It's like they take natural gas, they strip out the carbon, that's hydrogen that fuels those jets that put those satellites in space. And that's a great thing so that we can do that. But you're right, we do have access to more energy now than people did 100 years ago. And so we can get out of town. Our homes are more resilient. Humanity is better off because of our access to energy. And so that's one issue that I wanted to share, or one statistic that I wanted to share there. And we're seeing that in countries like Germany, where you have 300,000 families a year that lose their electricity because they can't afford it. It's cut off from their electric provider. To me, that's absolutely appalling to have electricity in your home. And I really believe that's probably going to be the next big push from the left. You've got free health care for all. You're going to have free electricity for all, because they've gotten the government so involved in it, and you're limiting access to it with some of the policies that are being pushed in place, like states by New York and California, where they've completely banned fracking, and now they're trying to ban pipelines. They're banning natural gas coming into your home, which is awful. And so you do, and you've got people in California that are experiencing life without electricity now. And it's, believe me, it's not a life we want to live. We try it. I love it when the people from the Sierra Club and Greenpeace just challenged me and jumped down my throat, and I said, do the 30-day challenge. I want you to live 30 days without any use of fossil fuels whatsoever. Do it and show me how it works. But you think about it, we've got natural gas. The Marcellus in Pennsylvania, I think, is the largest play in the country. Texas is the largest producer, but we've got multiple plays. Massachusetts in 2017 imported liquefied natural gas from Russia because the pipeline infrastructure is not there from Pennsylvania. So they bought liquefied natural gas from Russia. There's the Russian collusion we should be worried about right there. When we're sitting on so much natural gas just south of them, it's their own. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, I've gotten called out for that a lot because the Jones Act, I've asked for a temporary 10-year waiver on Jones Act for LNG shipments, because if you take natural gas from Texas, you can't ship it to places like Puerto Rico. They have to buy propane from Trinidad and Tobago, which hurts their air quality. It burns dirtier than natural gas. They should be able to get natural gas from Texas, but you can't because there's not a single U.S.-made vessel that hauls liquefied natural gas. It has to be made in the United States, fly a U.S. flag, and be crewed by Americans, are the requirements in the Jones Act. There's not a single vessel in the world that exists today. But if you did a 10-year waiver on that, I guarantee they'd start building ships within 2 years, which would be incredible boost for even more economic development here, more steel in the United States, and help jobs. We've poll tested this, that the two biggest movers of people that are anti-energy, anti-fossil, to get them to be pro, are when it comes to our air quality here in the United States. Again, 200 kids, 100% of them thought that air quality was worse today than it was 10 years ago. The EPA politicized CO2. You've got to have three things for life on Earth, and it's sun, it's oxygen, water, and CO2. It's pretty important to have, and it's 0.04% of our entire atmosphere. So when you hear, oh, we're 416 parts per million and it's growing and it's going to get worse, 416 parts per million, do the math, 0.04%. And it's gone up from about 0.031% over the last 120 years. And what are we seeing in that same time frame? 4 times the amount of food being grown on this planet than using the same amount of acreage for farming than we saw 100 years ago, because you can grow more food with more CO2. They pump it into greenhouses to produce stronger, healthier, faster growing plants and produce more food. That messaging of air quality, so you look at the harmful, what we call in the EPA determines there's 6 criteria pollutants, the one that actually cause humans harm. That's where we've reduced those 74%. Germany's seen a reduction in some of those, but it's because most of their manufacturing has left because they don't have access to electricity. And having served on the Economic Development Committee in trying to lure businesses in from out of state, there's a couple of things they want. They want affordable, reliable electricity and access to water. And if you've got those two things, then you're going to have a good shot at attracting jobs coming into your state. And that's why a lot of jobs are fleeing other states and other countries, is because they don't have the affordable, reliable electricity. Yeah. The other biggest messaging point, which plays on energy poverty, I talked about with Ethiopia, that is the largest mover. So we're not trying to get, and I don't want to get negative, I'm an optimist and I love America, and I absolutely love the work that we're doing in improving our environment. That's the message that I'm trying to sell is hope. We heard that a few years ago, but we really should be hopeful in our country and the work that we've done. And so I like to talk about the positive aspects, and let's talk about a challenge of getting everyone in this globe out of poverty. And you do that by getting them access to energy. And that moves people to be on our side more than any other message that's out there. The alarmists, the ones that think that we're going to die in 18 months, 10 years, 12 years, those are the same stories that have been said for hundreds of years. And they're playing on fear, really to try to raise money, in my opinion.
Okay. The promise was to get you out here on time. So, Jason, I'm sure you'll stick around.
Yeah, I'll stick around.
Everybody wants to talk and ask more questions. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks for everybody else being here. I hope you got a lot out of it. And log on and take a look. Jeff, you asked the question earlier. The link to those, I've forwarded those myself around. So, and make sure you get your review forms.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is to share the information that you're learning. If you like it and you agree with it, we need you to share that with your friends and your family to help educate more people. It's amazing how the network works.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.